All right, Russell Mars, I don't get this.
No.
Because I was sure that they kept telling the world how ghastly the monarchy is. It's a prison camp. All the royals want to get away from it, but they can't because they're trapped in the world of titles and privilege. And now they want to give their kids the titles of prince and princess, even though they don't live anywhere near the royal family. They don't do any duties. They do nothing to deserve it. They live in a mansion in Montecito in California and use their own royal titles to make loads of money, which may be the clue to why they want their kids to have it.
Yeah, I think you pretty much...
The woman's selling jam, surely. Their disrespect for the monarchy should end with William or Kate or possibly even our king having the courage to take away their titles and say to them, you didn't want to be part of this and you're not going to trade our name to line your own pockets. You're in or you're out.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely, Jeremy. I agree with you, absolutely. And I think it'll come to it. I think Harry has behaved treacherously towards the family and to Britain in his book. And I think that he's been absolutely shocked that Andrew had his title stripped from him. He thought that could never happen. And now, of course, he knows that William and Kate won't forgive him. And if he steps out of line yet again, he faces the danger of losing his titles just like...
Now, the Sunday Times has reported that Prince William will ban his disgraced uncle, Prince Andrew, from royal life and his coronation as king. That's a big deal, Kinsey.
Yeah, and the Daily Beast is actually taking this story even further, saying Prince William will strip Prince Andrew along with all other non-working royals of their HRHs and princely titles when he ascends to the throne. Meghan and Harry will see their dukedoms and HRHs formally revoked, according to the Daily Beast, by Prince William.
The move will not come with the fanfare of a royal herald or the booming blast of a trumpet from the Tower of London. It will arrive quietly, coldly, and with the devastating finality of a court order delivered in a plain manila envelope. Behind the heavy oak doors of the palace, a decision has been reached that is being described as something that could rewrite the future of the British monarchy for the next 100 years. Prince William, the man standing next in line to the throne, is not simply waiting for his eventual coronation. He is already cleaning house, and at the top of that list are his own niece and nephew, Archie and Lily Mountbatten Windsor. Those closest to the inner circle do not present this as a petty act of sibling rivalry or as some bargaining chip in a family feud that has dragged on for years. They describe it as a constitutional surgical strike, a move meant to cauterize a wound that has been bleeding the House of Windsor dry for a long time. That is what makes the timing feel so calculated. While Prince Harry continues what many describe as a furious media counteroffensive from California, William is said to be playing a much longer game. He is not interested in public back and forth, in televised interviews, or in glossy documentaries that vanish from public attention almost as quickly as they appear. He is focused on preserving an institution that is more than 1,000 years old. The line in the sand, according to this account, has not merely been drawn. It has been reinforced into a fortress wall. What is unfolding is presented as the story of a future king who believes the era of peace offerings and olive branches has already passed, and that the era of accountability has now arrived with real and permanent consequences for the Sussexes. To understand why this is being framed as such a decisive moment, the story turns to the invisible threads of power that shape royal identity. A title such as Prince or Princess is not described as a decorative badge worn for ceremony or social prestige. It is a legal designation governed by rules that reach back to the 1917 letters patent. When King George V introduced those rules during the upheaval of the First World War, the intention was to slim down the monarchy so that only the most direct descendants of the sovereign would carry the status of Royal Highness. For years, those rules were treated as little more than a formality. Now they are being portrayed as something much sharper in the hands of a man who places duty above blood. When Archie and Lily were born, they did not automatically receive those titles because they were the great-grandchildren of the Queen. Only when Charles became king did they become the grandchildren of the sovereign. But the account insists that Harry and Meghan moved quickly to use those titles immediately, in what many insiders saw as a preemptive strike, almost as though they were trying to secure the position before anyone could shut the gate. The issue is presented as going beyond symbolism. According to this version, they did not merely want travel documents. They wanted the HRH designation clearly printed because this was not just about identity. It was about ensuring that, when Archie and Lily grew older, they would have the legal standing to claim a share of royal status and all the advantages connected to it. For William, this is described as the final straw. He is said to have viewed it as a Trojan horse, a way for a branch of the family that has spent years publicly attacking the monarchy to leave itself a route back in for future commercial benefit. There is said to be bemusement and anger within royal circles that Harry would continue claiming the rights of an institution he has worked so hard to damage. William has reportedly made his position clear. There will be no royal roles for them, not now and not later when he becomes king. Yet the argument does not stop at titles or legal definitions. It goes deeper, into what is presented as the darker current underneath the entire dispute. William's resolve is described as having been strengthened by what he sees as a betrayal of the family's charitable legacy. One of the most explosive claims centers on Centabale, the charity Harry co-founded to support children in Africa living with HIV and AIDS. This had long been seen as Harry's most meaningful achievement, the part of his public life even critics respected, because it seemed to continue the spirit of his mother's work. But the account claims that behind the scenes, the reality was far less noble. Citing investigative writers such as Tom Bauer, it alleges that staff connected to Harry and Meghan's new venture, Arkawell, were trying to divert donors away from Centabale and toward their own nonprofit. The implication is harsh. Money that might have gone to vulnerable children in Africa was allegedly being steered instead toward a California-based organization tied to the lifestyle and image of two globally famous people. That allegation is presented as a shockwave inside the royal household. The story goes further by claiming that when the head of Centabale, Sophie Chandauka, tried to pursue a full financial audit to understand why Harry's friends were receiving massive six-figure salaries from the charity's funds, she encountered immediate hostility. Harry's side allegedly treated her as an enemy, someone trying to destroy his life's work. For William, whose own public identity is built around high-impact projects such as the Earthshot Prize, that kind of conduct is described as disgraceful. In this account, he sees the royal platform as an instrument of service and soft power, not a personal cash machine. These claims of financial disloyalty are presented as the clearest proof yet that the Sussexes cannot be trusted with even the smallest remaining connection to the crown. The tension, however, is not described as only legal or financial. It is also personal in a way that cuts far deeper. Within palace circles, attention has reportedly focused on Meghan's relationship with Princess Charlotte, or what some insist is the lack of one. Two moments are treated as especially significant. The first takes place during Trooping the Colour in 2018, when a very young Charlotte lost her balance and fell while the family stood on the Buckingham Palace balcony before the crowds. The account says that while the rest of the family responded with immediate concern, video footage appeared to show Meghan and Harry laughing in the background. Defenders have brushed it off as a harmless, brief moment, but within the Wales family, it was allegedly seen very differently, as a glimpse of what some called a genuine mean girl streak and a startling lack of empathy toward a small child who could have been hurt. The second moment came during the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, a time of enormous mourning and gravity. According to this account, several cameras captured Meghan looking at Princess Charlotte in a way that many described as cold and even malicious. One royal observer posting under the name Meghan's Mole went so far as to say that the jealousy and hostility directed at the young princess were off the charts. For parents such as William and Catherine, the story argues many things might eventually be forgiven. A tell-all book might be endured. A documentary might be tolerated. But the moment any perceived bitterness seems directed at their children, the matter becomes unforgivable. That is why, in this version of events, the removal of titles is not framed only as an institutional defense. It is also being cast as a personal act of protection. William is presented as wanting to shield his daughter from a branch of the family that he believes carries a deep and unusual resentment toward her. What makes it more alarming, in this telling, is that it is not being described as a single isolated incident. It is part of a pattern, one that the story suggests reaches back long before Meghan ever entered palace life. That pattern is presented as stretching back even further, long before Meghan ever stepped inside a palace. The way she handled her own father, Thomas Markle, is used as an example of something far more calculating than the version the public was first encouraged to believe. For years, the story was that Meghan was the devastated daughter of a father who had sold her out to the paparazzi. She wrote that her heart had been torn into 1,000 pieces, and that image of betrayal settled into the public mind as fact. But the account here insists that a different reality emerged later, one that made the entire episode look far more deliberate. Evidence is said to have surfaced connecting Meghan to Jeff Rayner, the photographer from the agency involved in staging the photographs of her father. It is claimed that she had worked with Rayner years earlier during her time on Suits. From that, a theory gained momentum that the entire scandal was less an unfortunate accident and more a carefully arranged trap, a way to justify cutting her father out of her life while keeping the moral advantage in public. If she could do that to her own father, the argument goes, then there would be little reason for the Windsors to believe they were safe from the same kind of treatment. For William, this is said to have revealed a level of media manipulation and personal ruthlessness that felt completely alien to the culture of the royal family. He is portrayed as seeing a woman who had allegedly drawn her own father into a scandal, fully aware that the fallout would allow her to control the public story that followed. A family built on the language of loyalty and continuity is described as having found that impossible to understand. The episode confirmed what many inside the institution had already begun to fear, that the Sussex departure had never really been about finding privacy or peace, but about turning royal status into something profitable, without accepting the boundaries, obligations, or discipline that came with it. William, in this version, looked at that pattern and concluded that there was no basis for trust left. Whatever remained of it had been almost entirely destroyed. The account then shifts from personal betrayal to the working reality behind the polished Montecito image. While the public is shown a glamorous California life, Arcueil is described as far more chaotic behind closed doors. The story paints a picture of a revolving door of staff, with senior advisors and executives repeatedly joining the Sussex operation only to leave after short periods. Even recently, high-level aides who were reportedly brought in to steady the brand lasted only a matter of months before resigning. Old accusations about a difficult work environment, accusations that echoed the bullying claims first raised in 2018, are said to have resurfaced again. One former staff member allegedly described the atmosphere as soul-crushing, a place where loyalty was expected but rarely returned. To William, this internal instability is not seen as temporary disorder on the path to building something lasting. It is taken as proof that the Sussexes are not constructing a serious legacy at all. They are building a house of cards, fragile and destined to collapse. He has watched them burn through connections in both royal and corporate circles, and he is said to have decided that the crown cannot be left to function as a safety net when that collapse finally comes. That concern is tied directly to the commercial turn Meghan has tried to make. Her lifestyle brand, American Riviera Orchard, is described as having been intended as the next big reinvention, something in the mold of a Martha Stewart empire that would finally cement the couple's financial independence. Yet, its launch is presented as flat, awkward, and even desperate. Instead of unveiling a powerful luxury venture, the world was shown images of strawberry jam and dog biscuits. The contrast was impossible to miss. On one side stood a woman who still carried the title of Duchess. On the other stood a woman marketing preserves and household goods on social media. Critics argued that the royal mystique lost its power the moment it became attached to kitchen products and influencer-style promotion. For the palace, this is described as exactly the kind of commercialization William had feared from the start. He is said to view it as the degradation of royal culture, with a title being dragged into the world of brand placement and lifestyle selling. According to this telling, he has already told advisors that the Sussexes are cheapening the brand, and every jar of jam sold only strengthens the case for stripping them of official status. But the hardening of William's position is not portrayed as purely institutional. It also comes from an emotional place shaped by Catherine's health. During her 2024 health struggle, the world watched as she stepped away from public duties and focused on recovery. For the Wales family, it was a period of real vulnerability, one in which privacy and calm mattered more than anything else. Yet the Sussex response, or what little response there was, is depicted as hollow. Their silence, or the carefully leaked messages of support that emerged, reportedly felt less like real family concern and more like public relations. William is said to have taken that personally. At a time when his wife was at her weakest, he allegedly saw their behavior as another example of pressure being added rather than comfort being offered. From that point on, his instinct to protect became even stronger. Harry was no longer viewed simply as the difficult younger brother who had gone rogue. He was seen as a source of tension and strain that Catherine did not need in her life. In that sense, the account presents this period as the moment William's resolve became iron. He was not only defending an institution anymore. He was protecting the woman he loved from what he saw as relentless and unnecessary turmoil. At the same time, the Sussexes are described as turning toward a different stage altogether. As they became increasingly frozen out of the traditional centers of royal life, they began leaning into appearances in Commonwealth countries, such as Nigeria and Colombia. These trips are framed not as harmless visits, but as a deliberate Commonwealth pivot that the palace views as a direct challenge to the authority of the king. Harry and Meghan are depicted as behaving like a rival royal court, meeting leaders, appearing in ceremonial settings, and stepping into a style of public role without any of the oversight or diplomatic framework that normally governs official royal work. It is described as the dangerous creation of a shadow monarchy. In Nigeria, Meghan was greeted as a princess by locals, and the account suggests that she leaned into that title despite no longer representing the British sovereign in any formal capacity. For William, this is presented as a constitutional nightmare. He is said to see a branch of the family operating freely enough to create its own foreign policy optics, with the potential to embarrass the United Kingdom or trigger diplomatic friction without accountability. That development only accelerated his determination to cut the cord for good. The controversy surrounding the Australian retreat is described as proof that public patience in the Commonwealth is wearing thin. The reaction there, according to this telling, was not an isolated burst of criticism, but a sign of a wider shift. More people are beginning to ask why they should carry the cost, in security or in status, for a couple who have publicly walked away from royal duty while still trading on royal identity. The petition in Australia, which drew more than 35,000 signatures, is treated as evidence that the Sussex spell is weakening. Celebrity no longer blinds people in the way it once did. They are beginning to look at the practical side of the equation, at the balance sheet, rather than the glamour. The story then returns to a remark Meghan was reportedly heard making on an earlier royal tour, that she should be getting paid for this. In this account, that remark becomes symbolic. She is presented as having failed to understand that she was already being paid, not in direct wages, but in public trust, prestige, and access. Once that trust disappears, the entire arrangement changes. The pay-to-play world she has moved toward is shown as much harder to sustain than she may have imagined. Charging $2,300 for a gala dinner might succeed once, but it is not described as a durable way to build a life that still tries to speak the language of service. As Meghan continues concentrating on branding, the story prepares to turn toward Harry, whose own crisis is becoming harder to hide. While Meghan is presented as focusing on branding, Harry is shown as struggling with something far more personal, and that struggle is said to be visible in nearly every photograph taken of him in California. Observers describe a dramatic change in his demeanor. He is no longer seen as relaxed, playful, or easygoing. Instead, he is increasingly portrayed as bitter, angry, and deeply defensive, as though the pressure of the choices he has made is beginning to settle visibly across his face and posture. The most talked about part of that change is physical. There is a sharp irony, according to this account, in the attention now being paid to Harry's own hair loss. In Spare, he had mocked William's baldness and described it in stinging terms, writing about his brother's appearance in a way that was widely seen as unnecessarily cruel. At the time, it seemed like one more example of Harry's willingness to wound his brother in public. But as the years have passed and the calendar moves into 2026, Harry is described as facing the same genetic reality himself. The sympathy that might once have softened public reaction is said to have vanished. The once charming rebel is now being reimagined as a man at war with everything around him, his family, his country, and even his own reflection. That reversal is used to underline a broader shift in public mood. The phrase that hangs over this part of the account is simple. If you cannot take it, do not dish it out. Harry had no hesitation in drawing attention to William's appearance, but now finds himself confronted by the same fate, and the public is described as seeing that not with pity, but with a kind of cold recognition. What is happening inside him is said to be showing outwardly. The stress, resentment, and disappointment are no longer hidden. They appear to have become part of his public image. This is set directly against William's own experience during what he once described as the worst year of his life. In 2024, William was dealing with the cancer battles of both his wife and his father, carrying enormous emotional strain while maintaining discipline in public. Harry, by contrast, is presented as spending that same period locked in court battles and trying to disguise his thinning hair with styling tricks and cosmetic cover. The contrast between the brothers is made as stark as possible. One is described as emerging from crisis with greater authority and inner steel. The other is shown as a man increasingly haunted by the consequences of his own decisions. From there, the account moves into a broader judgment about who Harry has become. He is no longer portrayed as the prince from a modern fairy tale, the wounded yet sympathetic younger son whose struggles once inspired affection. Instead, he is framed as a cautionary tale, an example of what happens when someone believes they can keep the privileges of the crown while rejecting the discipline, loyalty, and restraint that make those privileges possible. What once looked like freedom now looks, in this telling, more like exile of his own making. He is shown as someone who wanted independence without consequence, status without responsibility, and influence without service. That is why William's reaction is described not as temporary anger, but as part of the making of a new kind of king. This is where the entire conflict is pulled into a larger frame. William is presented as having moved beyond the old royal motto of never complain, never explain. He is becoming, in this version, a leader who understands that protection of the whole may sometimes require cutting away whatever threatens it from within. The metaphor used is clinical and unforgiving. To preserve the institution, the infected part must be removed. That is why the decision to strip Archie and Lily of their titles is described as likely to become the defining act of William's era as Prince of Wales. It is meant to send a message that leaves no room for ambiguity. You are either in or you are out. There is no middle ground, no such thing as part-time royalty, and no acceptable path that allows someone to sell the prestige of the crown in support of a California lifestyle while remaining attached to the institution in name. The account insists that William is approaching this without sentimentality. He is not expected to take prisoners or show mercy, because in his eyes, the survival of the monarchy demands that kind of hardness. The House of Windsor is described as moving forward with a more sophisticated and determined posture, one shaped by everything that has happened between the brothers. Harry and Meghan's story, in contrast, is projected into the future as little more than a footnote, a modern parallel to the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, but updated for the age of social media, struggling streaming deals, and relentless commercial reinvention. Their drama may have dominated headlines for a time, but the implication is that history will ultimately reduce it to a cautionary sidebar in the larger history of the crown. That judgment extends to Archie and Lily as well. In this version of the future, they are expected to grow up not as active members of the royal family, but as private citizens, far removed from the responsibilities as well as the prestige of the institution their parents left behind. Their relationship to the monarchy is presented as something that will eventually be dissolved, not through William's cruelty, but through the consequences of Harry and Meghan's own actions. The story is careful to frame this not as punishment of children for the choices of adults, but as the unavoidable result of a line that their parents themselves crossed. What began as a family conflict has become something structural. The bridge back is no longer seen as standing. That is why the ending offered here is not one of reconciliation. There is no vision of a healing family, no suggestion that time alone will restore trust, and no expectation of some future reunion under softer circumstances. The resolution of this fairy tale is described instead as a clean, surgical break. The crown turns back towards service, continuity, and discipline, while the California branch is left to find its own path in a world that is already beginning to move on. What remains is not the hope of return, but the finality of separation. William's hard line is presented as less an act of vengeance than an act of definition. He is deciding what the monarchy will be, and equally important, what it will no longer allow itself to become. The final note in the transcript leaves the matter hanging as a debate. asking whether William's decision to take such a hard line against his brother's children is a necessary act for the monarchy's survival, or whether the family feud has gone too far. It also raises the question of whether the Australian retreat is simply another commercial gamble destined to fail. But beneath those questions, the central message remains unchanged. The monarchy, as this account tells it, is drawing a final boundary. Service remains inside that boundary. Commercial reinvention, grievance, and part-time royalty remain outside it. And once that boundary is fixed, there may be no crossing back.